The love you give is not yours. It never was. Every gentle word you speak, every tender gesture you offer, every moment of care you extend to another, it is an echo, a reflection, a ghost dancing in the chambers of your heart, wearing the mask. A virtue while carrying the DNA of your earliest wounds. You believe yourself generous, compassionate, evolved. You pride yourself on breaking cycles, on loving better than you are loved. But here stands the truth that will shatter your self-image like glass against stone. You love exactly as you are loved. The patterns run deeper than conscious choice. They are carved into the architecture of your soul. That anxious love that clings and suffocates? That distant love that fears intimacy? That performative love that seeks validation through sacrifice? These are not your original creations. These are inheritances. You are loving with borrowed hands, speaking with borrowed words, feeling with a borrowed heart. The inner child you think you've healed is still pulling the strings of your adult relationships, still hungry, still afraid, still repeating the only love language it ever learned. Look at your romantic history. See the pattern threading through every relationship like a golden thread of dysfunction. The same fights, the same fears, the same ways of giving and withholding, the same desperate attempts to fill the void that was carved when you were too small to understand that love was supposed to be unconditional. You attract what feels familiar, not what serves you. You recreate the emotional climate of your childhood. Home in every apartment, every marriage, every friendship. The thermostat is set to the same temperature of intimacy you learned to tolerate as a child. This is not conscious. This is not chosen. This is programming so deep, it feels like instinct, so ancient it feels like truth, so familiar, it feels like home. Before you had words, you had touch. Before you had thoughts, you had feelings. Before you had choice, you had conditioning. In those first sacred years, when your soul was soft clay in the hands of giants, every interaction carved itself into your being. The way they held you or didn't hold you. The way they spoke to you or fell silent. The way they saw you or looked through you as if you were invisible. You learned love like a language, not through instruction, but through immersion. Through the daily baptism of how you were treated, how you were valued, how you were seen. If love came with conditions, you learned to earn it. If love came with volatility, you learned to brace for storms. If love came with absence, you learned to fill the void. If love came with criticism, you learned to perfect yourself into worthiness. The child who is praised only for achievements learned that love is conditional on performance. The child who is comforted only in crisis learned that love requires suffering. The child who was ignored, unless they were entertaining, learned that love demands a performance. These lessons were not taught with words. They were absorbed through the skin, through the nervous system, through the developing brain that interpreted every emotional transaction as a rule about how love works in the world. Now watch yourself in your relationships. See how you unconsciously recreate the same emotional climate you once inhabited. How you choose partners who feel familiar, not healthy, but familiar. How you give love in the exact shape you once received it, or in the exact opposite shape, as if reaction were the same as freedom. The man whose mother was emotionally unavailable finds himself drawn to distant women, spending his life trying to earn what was never freely given. The woman whose father was critical marries a man who never quite approves, forever seeking the validation that was withheld in childhood. The tender child within you, the one you think you've rescued, is still there, still operating from those early blueprints. Still loving with the desperate intensity of someone who learned that love is scarce, dangerous, conditional, or performative. You think you've healed because you've identified the patterns. But identification is not transformation. Seeing the Cage is not the same as being free from it. The wounded child within you doesn't trust healing. It trusts what it knows. It trusts the familiar pain over the unknown possibility of joy. It chooses the devil it knows over the angel it DOESN single quotes T. This is not your fault. But it is your inheritance. And until you see it clearly, you will continue to love from the wound instead of from the wholeness. What is the self but a museum of early experiences? What is love but the eternal return of our first emotional encounters? The philosophers spoke of eternal recurrence, the idea that we are doomed to repeat our patterns endlessly until we achieve consciousness. But they did not speak deeply enough of how this repetition begins in the cradle, how it embeds itself in the neural pathways of a developing brain, how it becomes the invisible hand guiding our most intimate choices. Your inner child is not a metaphor. It is a living presence within you, a constellation of memories, wounds, and adaptations that formed when you were most vulnerable. It carries the emotional truth of your earliest years, like DNA carries genetic information. Silent, persistent, influential. This child learned to survive in the emotional ecosystem of your family. It developed strategies, defenses, ways of being that ensured connection and safety. These strategies were brilliant then. They kept you alive, helped you navigate the complex emotional terrain of your caregivers. The child who learned to be perfect to earn love becomes the adult who exhausts themselves in people-pleasing. The child who learned to be invisible to avoid conflict becomes the adult who struggles with intimacy. The child who learned to be strong to protect others becomes the adult who cannot receive care. But here lies the deeper truth. The inner child is not just wounded. It is also wise. It carries not only your pain, but also your original essence, the pure being you were before you learned to adapt, before you learned to perform, before you learned to earn love through behavior. This is the philosophical tragedy and triumph of human development. Our greatest strengths are often our deepest wounds in disguise, but our deepest wounds also contain our greatest gifts. The child who learned to read emotional atmospheres becomes the adult with profound empathy. The child who learned to be hypervigilant becomes the adult with exceptional intuition. The child who learned to care for others becomes the adult with tremendous capacity for love. The wound and the gift are the same thing, seen from different angles. The work is not to eliminate the inner child, but to integrate it, to honor both. Its pain and its wisdom, its vulnerability and its strength. But there exists another way to love. A love that does not spring from wound, but from wholeness. A love that gives not from emptiness seeking to be filled, but from abundance seeking to overflow. Imagine loving like the sun loves, without condition, without expectation, without the desperate need for reciprocation. The sun does not love the earth because the earth deserves it, or because the earth will love it back. The sun loves because it is its nature to shine, because it is full of light and cannot help but give it away. This is mature love. Love that has integrated the inner child rather than being controlled by it. Love that acknowledges the wounds, but does not let them dictate the terms of intimacy. When you love from this place, you no longer seek in others what you missed in childhood. You no longer try to heal your early wounds through your relationships. You no longer project onto your partner the faces of your first caregivers, expecting them to complete what was left unfinished. Instead, you love from your wholeness. You give because you are full, not because you are empty. You connect because you choose to, not because you desperately need to. You create intimacy from strength, not from fear. This love does not cling because it knows its own worth. It does not manipulate because it trusts in its own abundance. It does not sacrifice itself because it understands that authentic love preserves the self even as it opens to the other. From this place, your relationships become gardens where two whole people choose to grow together rather than hospitals, where two wounded people try to heal each other. But this transformation requires something radical. You must become the parent to your inner child that you needed, but never had. You must give yourself the unconditional love, the consistent presence, the patient understanding that your child self has been seeking in every relationship. This is not self-indulgence. This is self-liberation. For only when you have become your own secure base can you relate to others from security rather than from need. The inner child stops driving your relationships when it finally feels safe, seen and loved by the only person who was ever meant to provide that safety. You. But even this mature love must know its seasons. Even the sun sets. Even the river finds its way to the sea. There comes a time when the soul must withdraw from the business of loving others, to remember how to love itself. When the inner child, finally seen and acknowledged, must be held in silence before it can be truly integrated. This is the sacred solitude that terrifies the wounded child within you, the one who learned that connection is survival, that love is safety, that being alone means being abandoned. But maturity understands that withdrawal is not abandonment. It is renewal. In the silence, away from the mirrors of relationship, you meet yourself without the costumes of lover, friend, caregiver, or child. You sit with the raw truth of who you are beneath all the patterns, beneath all the inherited ways of loving, beneath all the strategies for connection. Here, in this stillness, the inner child can finally rest, can finally stop performing, stop adapting, stop trying to earn love through behavior, can simply be held in the unconditional presence of your own awareness. This is the great paradox of healing. Sometimes you must be alone to learn that you are not alone. Sometimes you must withdraw from love to remember how to love. Sometimes you must face the void to discover that you are not empty. The silence teaches what no relationship ever could, that you are complete, that you are whole, that you are worthy of love, not because of what you do or how you perform, but because of what you are. In this silence, the inner child's desperate questions finally find their answers. Am I lovable? Yes. Am I worthy? Yes. Am I enough? Yes. These answers don't come from another person. They arise from the depths of your own being, from the source. That was always there, waiting beneath the noise of seeking and needing and trying to earn what was always yours by birthright. This is not selfish. This is sacred. For only when you have learned to love yourself with the consistency and tenderness you once craved from others, can you love others from fullness rather than from need. The river must sometimes disappear into the underground springs to emerge pure again. The tree must sometimes stand bare through winter to bloom again in spring. A soul must sometimes retreat into silence to remember its own voice. Now comes the moment of choice. The moment when you decide whether to continue loving from the old patterns or to risk the unknown territory of authentic love. This is not comfortable work. It requires you to feel the grief of what you didn't receive, to acknowledge the ways you've been seeking in others what you can only give yourself, to release the familiar pain of old patterns for the uncertainty of new ones. It requires you to face the terror of the inner child who believes that changing the patterns means losing love entirely. It requires you to hold the child's hand as you walk into the unknown territory of relating from wholeness rather than from wound. But on the other side of this discomfort lies freedom. The freedom to love without the ghosts of your past dictating the terms. The freedom to choose partners who complement your wholeness rather than complete your wounds. The freedom to be intimate without losing yourself, to be generous without depleting yourself, to be open without abandoning your boundaries. This is the freedom to love like the sun loves from abundance, not from need. To love like the river loves flowing naturally, not forced. To love like the earth loves nurturing growth, not controlling outcomes. The inner child within you is not your enemy. It is not something to be healed or fixed or transcended. It is a part of you that needs to be welcomed home, integrated, honored for its wisdom, and held in its pain. When you can hold both the wound and the wholeness, the pain and the possibility, the fear and the love, when you can be present to all of it without being controlled by any of it, then you have achieved the integration that transforms not just your relationships, but your entire experience of being human. If these words have touched something deep within you, if you recognize yourself in this mirror, then write this commitment in the comments below. I choose to love from wholeness, not from wound. Let this be your declaration of independence from the inherited patterns of love. Let this be your promise to the inner child within you, that you will no longer ask your relationships to do what only you can do for yourself. The path of conscious love is not easy, but it is the only path that leads to true intimacy. It is the only way to break the cycles, to stop the endless repetition, to love in a way that heals rather than perpetuates the wounds. Your inner child is waiting, not to be rescued by another, but to be welcomed home by you. The love you seek has always been within your power to give. The healing you crave has always been within your capacity to provide. Begin there. Begin with the only love that was ever truly yours to give, the love you give to yourself. Begin with the only relationship that was ever meant to be, unconditional. The relationship with your own soul. The sun doesn't apologize for shining. The river doesn't apologize for flowing. You don't have to apologize for loving from the fullness of who you are. Begin now.